Well, good morning. Welcome to Compass. Our mission is navigating people to God. My name's Nate. I'm one of the pastors here. So glad that you're worshiping with us, whether that's in the room. Well, welcome to those of you who are worshiping at home or whenever you might be tuning into this. And if you're a guest, an extra special welcome to you today. We would love to meet you. Actually, after the service is over, if you're in the room, I'll be at the Next Steps area. I would love to meet you. I'd love to connect with you. If you're online, you can text Connect NFW right now or at any time in the service to 94,000, and we're going to send you a gift as well. It's our way of saying we're glad that you're here. Now, before I get into the message today, there's just a few things that I want to kind of update you on and make you aware of as we're kind of in a new season here at Compass North Fort Worth, and we're heading towards opening that brand new building on 287. And one of the things that I want to make you aware of is it looks like this theater is going to open back up for showings maybe sometime in the next month. And so what that means for us is that we are going to have to set up and tear down every week. And so we are looking for volunteers to serve on our setup and our tear down crews. And maybe you're looking for an easy way to plug in here at Compass. You can do that by setting up and tearing down with us. And you've got those cards there in the seat but beside you. If you're not serving somewhere, we need you to serve. If you're online and you're thinking, well, I'm out, there's nothing I can do. There's places that you can still serve, or maybe you're thinking about coming back. We want to get you plugged into serving here at Compass. And it's going to take all of us, as Francesca said, as we move into that building. We know that there are going to be thousands of people who walk through those doors who we want to have the very best experience that they can, just like you have had experiencing here worshiping at Compass North Fort Worth. So there's all kinds of opportunities to serve, whether that's on the setup team, it's with our tech crew, that's with our Compass kids, and they need more volunteers there. We want you to sign up. So fill this card out. Sometime during the message, when you get bored or whatever and you check out on me, go ahead, fill this out, and then bring it to us at the Next Steps area afterwards. And we are excited about what God's doing here. We see new faces each and every week, and we're continuing to grow, and we're seeing God move and work in some powerful ways. And so we want to invite you to be a part of that as well. And as I said, we're getting closer to moving into our building. We are like on a 6-month countdown till we move into our building. I don't know about you, but that gets me excited. And things are moving along really well. I was just out there the other day for a meeting, and I meet there every week with our building contractors. And actually, because the weather has been so good, we've only had 22 rain days since we started, which is amazing. And so we've actually caught up, and we've got a few more weeks ahead of our schedule. And so we're looking at an October opening there at the new location, and I can't wait for God and what He's going to do in that place. And so I hope you'll just join me in praying for what God's doing there, and for the construction, for the workers, for the people that we're going to meet because of that building. Well, on January 9th, 2007, the then CEO of Apple and the founder of Apple, Steve Jobs, he got up on stage, he made an announcement that would change the world forever. And this is what he said. He said, in 1984, we introduced the Macintosh. It didn't just change Apple, it changed the whole computer industry. In 2001, we introduced the iPod, and it didn't just change the way we all listen to music, it changed the entire music industry. Well, today we're introducing 3 revolutionary products of this class. The first one is a widescreen iPod with touch controls. The second is a revolutionary mobile phone. The third is a breakthrough internet communication device. So 3 things: a widescreen iPod Touch with controls, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communications device. An iPod, a phone, an internet communicator. An iPod, a phone, are you getting it? And these are not 3 separate devices, he said. This is one device, and we're calling it the iPhone. You see, on that day, in that announcement that the iPhone was coming into our hands, it changed the world forever. I remember when that announcement came out, and I'm a big tech guy, so I knew about the iPhone, and I was waiting and watching that announcement, and I knew that I had to have one of those iPhones, those very first ones. And so I remember standing in line on the day it was released outside of the Apple store at Kenwood Mall in Cincinnati, Ohio, so that I could receive one of those first Motorola, or one of those iPhones when they came out. Because I had, before that, I had this Motorola dumb phone that wasn't nearly as cool. And it wasn't anything like the Motorola Star Trek phone that I had when I first got my first cell phone. Some of you know what that one was like the flip phone, and they had the antenna that pulled out. Like, I thought I was cool back then. but it was nothing compared to this new device that Apple was unveiling. And this device and this screen that we now have has changed everything. Now, the reason I share that with you is because we're in this series. We're continuing a series we kicked off last week called Screen Time. And what we're doing and what our goal through this series is looking at how these devices, these revolutionary things have changed our lives and how maybe they've affected us even spiritually. And I know it can seem a little bit odd. Maybe this is your first time walking in here or tuning in online. You're like, why in the world are you talking about devices and screens in church? Like you're thinking, I don't think that Jesus talked about an iPod or an iPhone when he was preaching. What does the Bible have to say about this anyway? And the reason we're talking about this is we felt that this was an important topic, especially in light of all that's happened over the last year in our world, and the more that we're focused on our devices and our screens, to take some time and address this, because while most of us wouldn't say that technology is bad, in fact, I think we would argue that most of us would say that technology is a neutral thing, that can actually be a good thing, but technology, if we're not careful, it can also be a bad thing if we use it improperly. And so when we think of our screens, I want us to think about our screens differently. And this is my hope today, is that when we think about our screens, it's not something that we think of that consumes us and controls us. But instead, when we think about our screens, we think of our screens more as tools. And like any tool that you would find in your toolbox at home, you always want to find a tool that is perfect for the job that you're trying to do, right? Like the tool, when used efficiently and effectively in the appropriate way, it can be a tremendous help. Like, I don't know about you, but if I'm trying to hammer a nail into a board, the last thing that I'm going to use to do that is my fist. That would not be a smart idea. Like if I really want to be effective, I want to be productive and fast, then I'm going to pick up the hammer out of my toolbox and I'm going to nail that nail into the piece of wood. You see, the hammer makes things productive when you're trying to build something. And the same can be thought of when it comes to these screens. When we use them in good ways, they can help us to be productive. They allow us to connect with people and do all kinds of things. There's knowledge and information that's at our fingertips. These screens, they have this incredible power. And when we think about our screens, the way we need to think about them as we use them as these tools that are helpful to us. And you know, when it comes to technology, I think all of us would agree that a lot of it has changed how we use it, and it has changed pretty rapidly. Like, I don't know, I was thinking about this, but there was a time when you actually just used your phone to make phone calls, right? Like that was what a cell phone was designed for. And you had to watch how long you were on your phone because you actually paid after you went over like 200 minutes. Like it started charging your bill. Like you didn't want to be on your cell phone too much. And there was a time, like even when you didn't text on your phone, because every time you got a text or you sent a text, you got charged and it just raised the price of your bill. There was a time when there wasn't such a thing as unlimited talk, text, and data, which for the students in the room, like you're like, what are you talking about, right? I know there's a group of people today that seems completely crazy, but that's what we used our phones for. We just used them to make phone calls. Like even things like Google and being able to search up where the best restaurant is to go to, or to find a phone number so that you can make a call. You couldn't do that. Actually, you had to do this thing. You had to dial 611, right? Which some of you are like, what's 611? Well, Google that, all right? You'll find out more. But it really, this phone, this device, it was only for calling. Now when I think about my phone, I think that I probably use it for calling the least. Like that's probably the last thing that I do with the phone. Like back in the day, though, when I went to college, that's when I got my first cell phone. I thought I was big stuff because I got a cell phone, and that was an upgrade over a pager, right? And some of you had a pager. You're like, yeah. Now today, I use my cell phone more like a pager. Like I watch to see what number's coming in, and I'm like, don't want to answer that call, right? Or I can screen my calls, and if I've ever ignored you, it may not be that I didn't want to miss your call. It's just I was actually busy, all right? So don't take it personally. But this device, it's changed a lot over the years. And it can be used for good, but it can also be misused. Because if we aren't careful, this little device, it can do a lot of harm. And as we talked last week, and it can affect us, and it can affect our health both mentally and spiritually. So it's important that we realize just how powerful this tool that we have at our disposal all the time really is. I don't know if you've thought this or not. I know that I have. But definitely thought about how this device, I've allowed it at times to consume me. That I've allowed this device to control me at times. And there's been many times in my life, and even to this day, where I spend way too much time on that device. And it distracts me from things that are really important. Have you ever had that experience in your own life? I found this stat really interesting. It said that the average person today receives 80 notifications on their smartphone every day. Between texts, calls, emails, notifications from the social media platforms that we use. I think about my own life. That seems a little bit low. Like I feel like I'm constantly feeling my phone buzz in my pocket, or I'm hearing the ping when I don't have it on silent, and I can hear just all these things that I'm being distracted all the time. In fact, even as I was writing that thought down in my manuscript, I got my phone buzzed 3 times in 30 seconds. So here's the question that we're trying to answer in this series. What are our screens doing to us emotionally, relationally, and spiritually? And the goal is really to begin to give some serious thought to how we've allowed technology to play into our lives. And it's our hope as we talk about this that we begin to move from being reactive when it comes to our devices to being more proactive when it comes to how we use them. Now, if you've got a Bible or a Bible app on that screen of yours that's in front of you, go ahead, turn with me to Romans chapter 12. We looked at Romans 12 last week, and we're going to come back to these verses that we looked at, and it's going to set up where we're headed today. But in Romans chapter 12, in the first 2 verses there, Paul, he's writing to some early Christians who were struggling with some of their own difficulties. It wasn't the same thing that we are dealing with today, but it was the same heart issue behind it. And Paul, he writes to them and he says, I want you to pay attention to the way that you're living your life. I want you to be intentional about how you're living your life and the way that you're spending your days and your hours and your minutes. And so he doesn't kind of hammer them. He gives them some encouragement. And listen to what he says, starting in verse 1 there. He says, therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. So Paul's inviting his listeners, he's inviting us as we think about this to examine our lives. But the way that he says it is in this encouraging way. He doesn't say this. He doesn't say, I want you to examine yourself with through this lens of guilt and mercy, or grief and shame and fear. He says, that's not my motivation for this. He says, I want you to examine yourself through the lens of God's mercy towards you. Examine yourself through the lens of God's love and his grace and his mercy and his kindness. And that ultimately God's hope for you is that you would live the healthiest and the happiest and the holiest version of you that you can. You see, what God wants for you and I is he wants for us to be the best version of ourselves that we can possibly be. So that's why we're talking about this, and what we're looking at is that we want to examine our thoughts, and we want to examine how we're spending our time and how we're spending our energy. Which is why one of the things that's such a big deal to God is sin. And some of you might be thinking, oh, I don't want to talk about sin. Like, why do we have to talk about that? Like you maybe you get uncomfortable talking about sin. But what we need to understand is that when we talk about sin, he's not mad at you for sinning. Actually, God's not even surprised by it. God is mad at what sinning does to you and the people that you love. And I'm willing to bet when it comes to the sins that you have maybe done in your own life, you're not really that happy about them either. And I get some of you who might be thinking, okay, so what do screens and sin have to do with each other? Well, here's where I want to go with this. Sin is taking a good thing that in and of itself is not a bad thing and engaging with it so it becomes the thing. Sin is taking a good thing like technology or food or drink or entertainment or sexual intimacy and over-engaging with it to the point that it becomes the thing. It becomes the sole focus of your life. And so what we have to understand is this, is if food becomes the thing in your life, then what happens is we practice gluttony, and it causes health, or it can destroy our health. If alcohol becomes the thing that then what happens is we risk becoming an alcoholic, and it can destroy our image. If entertainment becomes the thing, then we can become consumed by it, and we can even become lazy. If sex becomes the thing, then our relationships, those things can be in jeopardy. And when that happens, these things, they become the thing that you just can't live without. And when someone points it out in your life, like, hey, you're focusing on that a lot, like that seems to be something that's got a hold of you, like we get defensive, and we don't want to talk about it because it's what we run to, it's what we cope with, and we don't like when we're being pushed or when we're being told like we shouldn't mess with that stuff. And oftentimes it becomes this thing that we rely on too much. Like it becomes what our identity is. Unfortunately, for many of us in the room, and even for those of us online, that's what our screens have become. Like we didn't set out to get caught up in our screens. We didn't mean for that to happen. It just sort of happened, and I think this is where the issue lies. You know, I remember when Facebook just kind of became the thing. There was this thing before Facebook called MySpace. How many of you have MySpace? Make some noise if you have MySpace, or online, go ahead and make some noise in the chat section. I didn't have MySpace, all right? I didn't want MySpace. I was like, that's lame. Why would I want MySpace? Well, my wife Amanda had MySpace, and then Facebook came around, and she signed up for Facebook, and she was like, you should get Facebook. And I was like, I don't want Facebook. And she was like, no, you should get Facebook. And so one day, she signed me up for Facebook, even though I really didn't want it. And so then I had Facebook, and now today, I think about it, I'm on that app, I'm on that website way too much during the day, and it drives me crazy. But you see, that's exactly the goal of these programmers when they're designing these apps and these devices. They stay in business the more that they can keep your eyes on the screen. And they'll readily admit that. In fact, listen to what the now CEO of Apple said back in 2017, Tim Cook. He said this. He says, if you're looking at your phone more than someone's eyes, you're doing the wrong thing. I think that's pretty eye-opening, isn't it? I mean, maybe for some of you, you're thinking about when you got that cell phone. Maybe you got it for work so that you could be connected to work, but now that cell phone is in your pocket, and you bring it home with you, and there's really no difference between when you're using it for work and when you're at home. There's no boundaries, or there's no off limits anymore, and work has bled into your home life. Or maybe for some of you, you cut the home phone, and your kids are at home, and so you thought, well, I'll just get them a cell phone for emergencies, and you gave them a phone, and now that phone is something that's always in their hands, and they're going to their rooms, and they're shutting the door, and they're texting their friends in these strange emoji languages, or in this code that you can't ever decipher. Or they've got the app Snapchat, and they take pictures of random nothingness, and they send it to their friends, and you're like, what are you doing? And they're like, well, I'm trying to keep my streaks alive. And they're like, I don't get this. Like, what is the point of it? Like, why don't you just use the text message? And they're like, that's not cool anymore, Dad, right? Maybe for some of you, when it comes to technology with your kids especially, you feel overwhelmed, or you maybe don't know where to begin. Or maybe for some of you, the reason you signed on to that social media app like Facebook or Instagram was just simply so that you could keep up with family, so you could post pictures, so that your family who doesn't live by you, that they could see what's going on in your life. But now that app has become this thing that you just turn to all the time, and you're reading stuff, and you don't really know what to believe anymore, or even how to respond. And unfortunately, these devices, they've taught us that we can just look to them for everything. And they've become this thing that in many cases, like, we thought they were going to be better for our lives, but they've only served to let us down. Now, let me ask you this. Have you ever been let down by your phone? Like have you ever one of those moments where maybe you're texting someone, and you don't really read what you texted, and it auto-corrected on you, and you sent something that you didn't mean to send? Or maybe like you're going through and you've got multiple text conversations going on and you send a text message to somebody you didn't mean to send a text to that is completely off and it doesn't make any sense. Or have you ever had one of those things? A couple of weeks ago, my wife Amanda and my daughter McKenna, they were out shopping, and I knew they were close to Target, and so I was like, hey, I need you. I talk text because I'm always busy, so I talk text, and I was like, would you and Kenna stop at Target and get some creamer for me? Well, about a minute later, I got a text back from Amanda that just said, quinoa, question mark. And I looked down at my text and it said, will you and quinoa stop at Target and get some creamer? You see, my text, my Siri had failed me. It had let me down. Even last night, we were out with some friends and we had gone to a restaurant and then we were like, we want some dessert. And so I typed in the Google dessert places near me. And found the place we wanted to go to, and then we had another idea, like we're just gonna go to BJ's and we're gonna get the pizookie, with ice cream, and so we were driving back from Fort Worth, and so I just typed in BJ's restaurant, and what happened is it actually took me to another one that was further away from where I wanted to go than actually where I intended to go. You see, sometimes our phones and our screens, they let us down. And we become so dependent on them. Now, when Paul wrote these words in Romans chapter 12 to these Christ followers living in Rome, one of the big cultural issues of that time was idolatry. And which I don't know what comes to your mind when you think about idolatry. Maybe you think of worshiping this big, tall, golden statue like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were supposed to be forced to worship. Or maybe it was someone carrying around this little, tiny Buddha that they would put down and they would bow down to. Maybe that's what you think about when you think about idolatry. You might not even think that idolatry is something that is really something we deal with today. But if we really dig into this and think about it, we've got our own idols today, don't we? Tim Keller, in his book, Counterfeit Gods, he says this. He says, an idol is whatever you look at and say, in your heart of hearts, if I have that, then I'll feel like my life has meaning. And then I'll know that I have value, and then I'll feel significant and secure. Or how about how Henry Blackaby defines idolatry? He says this about an idol. He says, anything that you turn to for help when God invited you to turn to him for help. Man, I read that definition. I was like, that is a home run there. This was what was happening in Rome at the time, is that they were turning to these other things rather than God for help. In fact, look at what Paul writes in Romans chapter 1, verses 22 and 23. I'm going to read from the Message paraphrase. It says this, it says, what happened was this. People knew God perfectly well, and when they didn't treat him like God, refusing to worship him, they trivialized themselves into silliness and confusion so that there was neither sense nor direction left in their lives. They pretended to know it all, but they were illiterate regarding life. They traded the glory of God, who holds the whole world in his hands, for cheap figurines you can buy at any roadside stand. What can we buy at those roadside stores today? They're not really that cheap, right? But we buy these devices and they've become these idols in our lives. What Paul was getting at to these early believers living in Rome is that, man, they had all these various physical temples that they could go to. They had all these places that they could turn to for help, to find comfort, to find direction and instruction in their lives. But rather than looking to God for direction and instruction in their lives, they turned to these pagan temples to get their fix. And today, listen, we no longer have to go to a physical temple to get a fix. I mean, we carry these temples around in our pockets. We can go anywhere we want, anytime, online, in relative anonymity. Nobody even knows that we're doing it. And we can look for comfort or instruction or direction on this device. That's what we do. What happens is when we're feeling restless, we might visit the temple of Amazon. Because like buying something on Amazon, it feels good. And like, man, Amazon Prime, we can get it to our house in 2 days. And now that we live in the metroplex of DFW, sometimes you order something, it's at your door in 2 hours after you ordered it. And it feels really good to get that package, even though you don't really need it and you don't need it that fast. But you order it because you want to open that package. And so you hit that order button and you've gone to the temple of Amazon because you're feeling restless. Or you're looking for inspiration. So some of you might open up your phone, you go to the temple of Pinterest. You start pinning, man, I want my house to look just like Chip and Joanna, right? I want to make a recipe that's just as good as Rachel Ray, right? And so we go to the temple of Pinterest for inspiration. Or we're looking for fulfillment, so we might go to the temple of a porn site. Or we're looking bored or we're lonely and we visit the temples of Instagram or TikTok to fill our time. And honestly, it seems harmless to us, but I wonder what this looks like to God. Like he sees all of his people turning to their screens and they're in this position that kind of looks like worship. Like they're almost with their heads down. It almost looks like they're bowing in worship to these devices. You see, for many of us, instead of putting our screens on an altar, we've turned them into an altar. Instead of leaning into God who created the world with his hands, we traded him for devices we hold in our hands. Unfortunately, these online temples we have, they don't fill the void in our life. They only make us more anxious. They make us feel more empty. They make us feel depressed and depleted. Why? Because these are false gods. And we didn't mean for it to be that way, but it becomes that because it's what we've turned to for help rather than turning to God for help, when God is the one who has asked us to turn to him for help all the time. And these things, they promise us so much, but the problem is they always let us down. So here's what I want to do with these last few minutes that we have left today. I don't want to leave you there and like thinking, well, this is terrible news, right? I want to try to give you some hope, and I want to give you some help as we close out this message today. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to ask you a series of questions this morning, questions that are designed to help you, maybe to help have a discussion with your kids or maybe in your life group, kind of think about your screen usage and how maybe you can power down these devices in your life. And so I want to begin with this question right here. How do I know if I've become too dependent upon my screen? Now, maybe you're wanting me to give you some formula that helps you to understand. I'm not going to give you that today. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to ask you some more questions that will help you to understand whether or not maybe your phone has too much control of you. The next question I'll ask is this: is it the last thing I look at before going to bed and the first thing when I wake up? Is it what you reach to when you can't sleep? Is it the thing that when you're bored, like you just got to look at it when there's something big going on in your life? Is the screen the thing that you're always scrolling? When you wake up, even before going to the bathroom in the morning, do you pick up your phone and check your news feed? What if instead of this device, what if God was the first and last thing that you look to every day? I heard this was someone's motto to live by, and I loved it. It said this: Bible before bed, Bible before phone. I think that's good wisdom there. Now here's another question that I think we got to ask ourselves is this: when I get bored, do I instinctively reach for my phone? How would you answer that? Or this next question: do I interrupt conversations to check my screen when there's a text, a call, or a notification? How are you doing on these questions so far? Have you answered yes? I know as I was asking myself these questions, I didn't like how I was responding. Now let me give you 4 more questions. These are the most important questions on the list. The next question is this: where do I turn for comfort when I'm hurting? You see, where you run to for comfort first tells a whole lot about what you're putting your trust and what you're putting your hope in. I don't know, but maybe after a long day of work, maybe you get in a fight with your spouse, or you and your kids, you're battling because of grades or something that's going on in their life, and so you just decide to go to the temple of ESPN Plus, or Amazon, or Twitter, or maybe in a more serious example, you turn to those adult websites. You get that little bit of dopamine rush, and you're feeling better about yourself, and you feel better for a little while, but it doesn't last. Where do you turn to for comfort when you're hurting? Or how about this next one? Where do I go for direction when I'm confused? Oftentimes, today we go online first and we ask questions, we post it. I see it all the time. Now on Facebook, it's just like you can ask a question and it tells you how many people have answered you, right? And so we need direction in our life. And so we ask questions, hey, can you help me with this? And then what do? We go and we read all those answers. But unfortunately, if all we ever do is look at the answers that everybody else is giving us and we don't turn to God who can give us answers from his word, then we're missing out on what God wants to say to us in our lives. Increasingly, we're looking to our screens more than we're looking to God for direction. In the last 2 years, I found this really interesting. It said that there's been a 60% increase in Google searches that begin with this: the best blank for me. So people are asking, what's the best car for me? What's the best neighborhood for me? What's the best school for me? What's the best dating website for me? What's the best look for me? What's the best color for me? What's the best career for me? What's the best church for me? And they just keep asking this. And Google has become this place that we go to, not just for information. It's become this place that we go to for direction in our lives. Or maybe it's not Google. Maybe we say, hey Siri, hey Alexa. And we ask those two things to give us the answers that we need when we should be saying, hey, God, would you show me what I need in my life? Another question that I think we should ask is this: where do I turn for fulfillment when I feel empty? Many of us, we turn to these apps or these social media sites like Instagram or online shopping or whatever it is because we're thirsty and we're looking for something to fill that and that quench that thirst that we have and that fulfillment. This kind of reminds me of an old rhyme I heard of an old sailor named Samuel Taylor Coleridge. He wrote this while on this ancient mariner. He said there was a sailor who was staring out on the deck of the boat at the sea. As he stared out at the sea, he said these words. He says, there's water everywhere, but not a drop to drink. It got me thinking. Here we are. We're standing in this sea of online information. There's information everywhere. There's water everywhere. We indulge in it. It tastes initially wet. It tastes initially good, but the problem is it's salt water. And so after a little bit of drinking that in, it makes us even more thirsty, and we're never finding the fulfillment that we need. It's what we've turned to for fulfillment. Yet the problem is this online sea that's available to us, it never will fulfill. Now there's one last question I want to give you today, and that is this: where do I turn to for validation when I feel insecure? Do you write a post? Do you take a selfie? Do you share a poll on Snapchat so that you can get a response and you just keep going back to it and you wonder how many people are commenting, how many people are liking, hearting, how many people are sharing your post, because that's where you need the validation in your life. Like you are dealing with insecurities, and so you post those things so hopefully that you feel secure about yourself. Listen, if you answered yes to any of these questions, or maybe you're like, yep, that's me, know this. In each and every one of those situations, God, He wants to be that for you. He wants to say some things to you. God wants to speak into your identity. Actually, listen to these words that Jesus spoke to a crowd one day. John chapter 5, verse 44, He says, how can you believe when you receive your glory from one another? You don't seek the glory that comes from the only God. Or how about this reminder from David, Psalm 37:4? He says this: take delight in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. Look, the validation you're looking for, you won't find on this screen. It only comes from God. And so I want to suggest today that we maybe need to turn our phones back into what they should be. That we need to turn them back into tools that can be used for good, but not things that consume us so much. So how do we have power over our screens? As we close, let me just give you a few practical things. And I'm not saying you have to do all these, but maybe try a couple of these. Maybe even starting this week, just try some things that can maybe help you have control over your screen. The first one is this: remove your phone or your screens from the dinner table and your bedrooms. Give it another home during those times of the day. Another suggestion is this: when spending time with family, put your phone somewhere else. Some people have these designated boxes that their phones go in when their family is spending time together so that they're not distracted by their phones. Another thing I might suggest doing is turn off the notifications so your phone doesn't buzz all the time. That you don't look at it every few seconds because you're getting those notifications. Or maybe another thing you can do is use the do not disturb feature more often. Now, these next two, they might be the most unpopular ones that I'm going to say, but I think they're things that we should consider doing. The first one is this: do a once a month social media fast. Take some time each month to fast from technology. Take a few days and say, I'm taking a break from this. Another one that I would suggest is delete social media apps from your phone. This is something, even before we knew that we were doing this series, this is something that I had to do in my own life because I realized that all those apps, I was just being consumed by them. And so I don't have any social media apps on my phone anymore. Like I just had to get rid of them because they were consuming me too much. If you have kids, here's one for you and your kids. Use wisdom when it comes to your kids' devices. Now, how do you do that? And we created a resource for you. And so on the screen right now, there's going to be a little QR code. You can take a picture of that, and you can go to that link that's there in the QR code. And we've created a whole bunch of resources for you. There's some messages there that you and your kids can watch together. I would encourage you to take some time and use wisdom and talk about it with your kids, about how much time you're all using on your phones. And then the last one that I'll give you today is this: go on a digital detox. And use the 1-1-1 rule. It's 1 hour a day, so during a meal, take a break. 1 day a week, take a Sabbath. And 1 week a year, take a vacation from your phone. You see, it's time that we not allow our screens to have so much control. It's time that we take back control and we use these devices the way they should be, as simply as tools. And most importantly, what we need to remember is this: let's be people who spend more time with God than we do with our screens. So as we close today, here's what I want to do. I want to pray for you. And I want to pray that we would begin to power down these devices in our lives and we would begin to focus more on God. And I just want to invite you to ask God maybe to change some of your habits so that you wouldn't be consumed by these things any longer. Let's pray. God, today we come to you and God, I know that in my own life I'm sorry for how much time I've spent on these devices that I have at my fingertips all the time rather than spending time with you. I'm sorry, God, that sometimes rather than going to you for answers, I go online and I post a question on social media, or I look at Google and I try to find the answers there when I really should be turning to you and your word. God, I pray that each and every one of us, that we would do our best to begin to power down these devices in our lives and take more time to look to you and the power that you can do in our lives. So God, I'm just praying that we begin to reorient our priorities and focus more on you, that we wouldn't conform to the patterns of this world, but we would be transformed by your power, by your word and what it has to say. God, we're sorry in those times where we've looked to these other things for answers when we should look for you. God, I pray that you change our church, that you change us, and that we be solely focused on you first and foremost in everything that we do. God, help us to be better at our use of our time, and help us to turn to you in those downtimes, in those times where we're struggling and we're hurting and we're depressed. Help us to turn to you for the answers that we need. And God, I thank you that you're a God who loves us, that you're a God that is full of grace and mercy. And even when we mess up, even when we look to these other things, you don't stop looking to us and coming towards us. God, we pray that we would just do better at turning to you. So God, we pray these things in your name. Amen.